Hey, I'm Duff Mckagan. I play bass guitar. In the late 80s and 90s, I played with Guns N' Roses. More recently, I play with Velvet Revolver. Been fortunate enough to play with some of my idols also over the span of my career. Iggy Pop, played on his Brick by Brick record. Got to play guitar with Steve Jones and John Taylor and Matt Sorum in a band called Neurotic Outsiders. I grew up in a really large family. I was the last 8 kids, and my oldest siblings are 20 and 19 years older than me. So, and everybody else spans that 20-year difference. So, I was exposed to the Rolling Stones and Hendrix and Sly and the Family Stone and Earth, Wind and Fire. Really, you kind of name it, I was exposed to it since I remember. And I think luckily for me, and maybe why I went more toward a rhythm section type of role, was because the things that I really dug the most when I was 5 and 6 and 7 was things like the James Gang and Sly and the Family Stone, and sort of that funky groove that kind of carries the whole thing. And even if you listen to Zeppelin now with a critical ear, you'll hear how important the rhythm section, John Bonham and John Paul Jones, are to Led Zeppelin. They kind of carry the whole thing, and Plant and Page kind of flourish on top of that bedrock that they lay down. What led me to play bass at the beginning was simply one of my older brothers, who was kind of the cool guy in the family. He played bass in a rock band in the late 60s and into the 70s. Still plays today. Always a better bass player than me, but he had this kick-ass Les Paul studio bass at home. So I would, there's also guitars around the house. There was a drum kit at our neighbors next door. So I played everything, kind of growing up. Not any of them that well, but I had knowledge of how to, keep a 4/4 beat on drums and play A, G, D major chords on guitar and get around on the bass. And I think the players that I grew up listening to, because I had no idea of what technique they were using or chords they were playing, if they were major or minor or anything like that. They were just sounds to me. And I came to find out later, as you study good bass players, great bass players, probably in my view, the greatest bass player is Jimmy Jamerson, who did, a lion's share of the Motown stuff. And even Duck Dunn, who did all the Stax recordings with Booker T and the MGs. Those guys, Jamerson played with one finger, which is technically wrong, but it's the way he did it. And, that guy would, I won't say the state of mind he was in when he played, but, so technique and technicality were never that important to me. My early influences were punk rock, American punk rock. Punk rock was the thing that really influenced me when I started to play in bands and form bands. And that's simply because I was done listening to all my older brothers and sisters' music. It was time for me to set out on my own. And right at that very point, punk rock started in America. And it had probably been going on and getting more publicity and press in the UK, but it did start with Ramones, and Johnny Thunders and the Heartbreakers. To me, that's where real punk rock started, and the Pistols kind of picked up after that, and the Clash and the Damned. And then it came back over the pond to bands in California and up in Canada, DOA and Black Flag, Circle Jerks. I would see handbills and flyers in my hometown of Seattle. I got to see a lot of gigs as a teenager. And, punk rock did something in that it made bands very accessible to the audience. And, it wasn't odd for the band that was about to headline to be hanging out in the crowd or having a beer with you. And, gigs were usually about $2 or $3, maybe $5. I saw the Ramones. I saw Iggy Pop. I saw early Police, The Jam. Amazing gigs in small places. So I got to see the Clash on their first U.S. tour at the Paramount in Seattle. It's a theater that probably holds, 2,500 people, and there was 200 people there. And so it was very intimate. It was the Clash and basically me and some of my friends. And that was probably their most insane and untethered tour ever. And that gig in particular, the reason it influenced me so much was not just the way they played and how great they were, but it was their attitude and kind of their camaraderie with that small audience that was there. A friend of mine got his nose punched and broken. He was in the front row, and some security guy thought that my friend was getting too, rambunctious or something. So the security guy punched him in the nose. And it was just a little punk rock kid, and the guys in the Clash saw this, stopped the show. It was a wood barrier that was between the audience and the stage. And Paul Simonon went off to the side of the stage and grabbed the axe that, was hanging up to fight fires or whatever, and chopped down the wooden barrier. That was it for me. That was my breakthrough. That's what rock and roll was about. It was about a band and its audience, and nothing should get in between it. Pretty profound to me, and still to this day, and I've played a million gigs, and I think about that moment in my life. It was just an amazing thing that's had a huge effect on my life. My first band I formed, but I did play bass in the first band when I was 14 with two other guys, and we made a single that year. We were called The Veins. But I didn't play bass again in another band until Guns N' Roses started, and I was probably 20 years old. So my first gig ever was I was 14 and was 1979, and it was opening for Black Flag, which was actually the second band to figure out how to tour in a van, and it's before the internet, and to tour, you didn't know where the clubs were, you didn't know a place, didn't have enough money to stay at hotels, so on and so forth. So the pioneer of the whole, to this day, the do-it-yourself movement was a band out of Vancouver, BC, and they were called DOA. They were a massive influence on me, and pretty much anybody who came up at that time. You asked anybody who was in Black Flag, or the Germs, or any of the California punk rock bands that probably got a lot more notoriety than DOA. You asked them who was the first band, who paved the way to start touring on your own. And it was DOA. And they would pass the numbers on to other punk rock bands of houses you could stay at, like punk rock crash pads. And they'd pass along the phone numbers of the club owners, if it was a club, or the club a lot of times was somebody's basement, and you could get $50 or 75 or maybe even $100 a night, and you would just tour the States in whatever vehicle you had. And but so into my later bands, after my first band, in between 14 and Guns N' Roses, which is when I was 20, I played drums in a lot of punk rock bands, and even later on, I played drums on one of our Guns N' Roses records, Spaghetti Incident. I played on a song there, and I still really enjoy playing drums. And I've played guitar this whole time, and that's how I've done most of my songwriting, is on 6-string guitar. Until just very recently that I've been taking bass lessons and playing with my fingers on my right hand. It's kind of opened up this whole new world to me. I've actually been learning scales and different exercises that have allowed me to kind of see the whole bass neck as I've never seen it before. And in turn, it's opened up this whole new sort of songwriting world to me on bass. And so I guess you're never too old to learn and start something fresh and new. So I was playing in punk rock bands in Seattle from '79 up to '84. There was a great scene and great musicians in Seattle and in the Northwest. Seattle's a port city, and recession had hit the States in the early '80s, and somehow Seattle became a major port for heroin coming in, and so it really just decimated Seattle and its music scene, and there was suddenly no clubs to play. There was a lot of guys just strung out, and I felt like I was on the rise, and I needed to get someplace that wasn't bogged down by that sort of darkness. So I decided at 19 it was either going to be New York or LA, and I didn't think my car would make it to New York. I had $360, and LA was just closer. So I moved to Hollywood, and I got there. I didn't know anybody. I looked at this newspaper called The Recycler. I looked to see who musicians wanted, and I saw an ad by a guy named Slash, and my name is Duff. His name is Slash. So I thought he was like some punk rocker guy. That, his influences were Alice Cooper, Aerosmith, and the Stooges. Said something like that, and I was into that. So I called Slash, and I went and met him and Steven Adler at Cantor's restaurant, which is in LA, and I got there, and these guys had long hair, and they weren't punker guys like me, but Slash and I had a musical affinity almost from that very moment. We went to his mom's house later that night, and he played guitar, and I was just pretty much dumbfounded how a guy, I think he was probably 18, could be, he was like an old soul on guitar, and Steven Adler was just like this enthusiastic kid who just wanted to go rock, and that spoke to me. And at some point in there, within a month or two, Izzy had moved across the street from where I lived in Hollywood, and there was this guy who looked like he could have been in the Heartbreakers,